the sugya of Zimon, I see that the Talmidei Chachamim at the Aguda, they're not afraid. Doesn't matter if it's 10 Simonim, doesn't matter if it's a sugya, kosher, it's kosher in the lumdis. They want whatever it is, more and more, Yeda HaTorah, Yediyas HaTorah, and most specifically, the sugya of Zimon, which is not just an inyan of, possibly we'll see in a moment, a deraisa, even if it's a derabanan, it'll be an asmachta, but it's an inyan of a Zimon for a mitzvah, a preparation for a mitzvah, a chana for a mitzvah. You find over here that the Magen Avram in our Siman in Kuf Tzadi Beis, when he discusses Zimon, he says, the inyan of Zimon, the inyan of saying Rabboisai, is the inyan of being mezamin ourselves and preparation for a mitzvah. We know that the hachana for a mitzvah sometimes has even more of a potential than the etzem mitzvah itself. The tzaddikim gave a tremendous amount of kavod to the preparation of a mitzvah. And here you find something most phenomenal, that you can have a situation of a zimun, and the zimun itself might even be a deraisa, and all that is being mezamin ourselves and a preparation for the mitzvah. Saying the Rabboisai, saying the Nevarech, putting us together and bringing us to the tachlis of why the Rebbeinu Shalom created the world, which was to give praise to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as to be Meshabeach in our benching, in our davening, like the Ramban says, say Precious Bay. And we have to get an appreciation for the Achan of a mitzvah. You say over a Maisa that there were two tzaddikim. One of them was more of a known tzaddik. He was more of a Yadua Dika tzaddik. And then there was one that was more of a closet tzaddik, maybe Echad Migdali Adar, but more of a closet tzaddik. He wasn't known as much as that gadol. And always, whenever there was a shayla who was going to be the sandik, so for Shteitzach, the known sandik, we'll call him Reb Zundel. Reb Zundel was always the sandik. Reb Anshel, nobody knew from Reb Anshel. They didn't know from Anshel so much. So Mamela, he was a closet tzaddik. He didn't know he's get the sandikoyas. No, one time, Reb Anshel and Reb Zundel, they went together. And they were on the road, and they came to a certain inn. At this inn, the innkeeper said, "Oy, what a murdikas, gavaldikas chus. I had a baby. Tomorrow is the bris, and gavaldik tu tzadikim. One of you could be the sandik one." So this is really, Reb Anshel's chance. He was never the sandik before, because Reb Zundel was always the big tzaddik. He was always the known tzaddik. So Reb Anshel said to Reb Zundel, "No, Reb Zundel, you're mamish the known tzaddik and the big tzaddik. Maybe today maybe tomorrow I could be the sandik for the first time." So the Reb Zundel said, "Of course, I'm a tzaddik. Of course you can have. What's the shiloh? It's avada. You're a grace tzaddik, and of course I'm humble and I'm a vater. You'll be the sandik tomorrow." Oh, Reb Anshel was so elated, such a simcha. He's going to be the sandik. So what did he do? The whole night he was meichen in the ma'ariv with such a fire, and then he decided to stay up the whole night with tanesim and tikkunim and inyonim, and mamish. He learned Kabbalah the whole entire night, and then afterward in the morning he went to the mikveh, and then after the mikveh he said the whole Sefer Tilim, and then he went to the mikveh again with the Sefer Tilim, and then Nachamol. And then it came time for the Shachris. The Shachris, after such a night of Achana being meichen himself for the mitzvah, being a sandik, Mamish, it was like a fire that went around him. It was such a fire. He had to go to the mikveh again. And Mamish, Azah Ma'ariv and Azah Tikkunim, and the whole night with half of a fella until the Zimra, and finally it came time for the bris. So the Moil was there, and he said, "No, Kvatich." Bekitzer, he turned to the Balabas. He said, "No, where's the sandik? Who's the sandik?" So he said, so he said, "Sandik." So who comes? Reb Zundel, the known tzaddik. Reb Anshel can't believe this. The whole night he was preparing to be the sandik, and now Reb Zundel, you told me up. You couldn't say anything because he's a tzaddik. He was a closet tzaddik. So what can he say? So Bekitzer, he comes, he takes the baby, they do the bris. Afterward, Reb Anshel comes to Reb Zundel and says, "Reb Zundel, I don't understand you. We spoke last night. I don't understand. You told me I'm going to be the sandik. What's a geschehen?" He said to him, "Azah Bal Taiva, such a Bal Taiva. I don't know. We had a deal. You're such a Bal Taiva. You had the Ma'ariv, you had the Tikkunim, you had the Mikvah, you had the Tilim, you had the Shachris, you had all the Achana. Well, such a Bal Taiva. You can't forgive me just the mitzvah. All that Achana, and you can't forgive me just the mitzvah." So the story might be a bit humorous, but there's a lot of emes to it. The Achana for the mitzvah that sometimes could be even more chashiv than the mitzvah itself. And that's the limit of Zimon. Zimon is that we come together to do the mitzvah deraisa of Birchas Hamazon, and we come together and we have to put ourselves into a proper mode, into a proper matziv, into a proper frame of mind. So let's learn the sugya. Ein lecha zimun yeser gadol mizayis. There's no greater zimun than learning the sugya and preparing ourselves for the sugya of benching, which will give the praise to the Rebbeinu Shalom. The etzem limit is a limit of praise to the Rebbeinu Shalom. And hopefully that'll be a schutz for us, for our families, for all of Kallah Yisrael that needs it today. The first shaila that we'll discuss, and I'm going somewhat, I'll say there, the Shulchan Aruch, and I'll try to mention somewhat Bez Hashem, the Marmakoimis that we discussed. The first shaila is Zimun Deraisa Derabanan. This achana for a mitzvah. Where do you have a makor in the Torah for achana for a mitzvah? The chayra zimun deraisa. So the Gemara Brachas down Daf Mem Hey seems to be quite convincing. The Gemara brings two psukim. Gadlu Lashem iti is the makor, says Rav Asi, of zimun. Come together and let's be magadol HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Or Rabbi Bao brings down ki shem Hashem ekra. Have a goydol lelakenu. Let's come together and give praise to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is the makor of Zimun, says Rabbi Bo, it says Rav Asi, sounds like the Raisa. And the Gemara Brachas Daf Mem Chesem and Beis brings down, Es Hashem Elekecha, after V'chalta V'savata V'rachta, Zu Birchas Hazon, Es Hashem Elekecha, Zu Birchas Zimun. Doing a Zimun, it sounds like is a deraisa. And this is what prompted the tour in Simin Kupei Chesi Vav. He brings the Ravid. It's talking over there about a situation of where a person, it has to do with the brachas, the extra brachas that a person makes if he forgot, the alav yavo, etc. So because of a Ravid tzarich loimer l'sasan l'simchas yom chag plein yazeh, because of Eid, ein loimer b'em lo shem v'lo malchus, because it's not a bracha kavua. He says you don't make a shem and malchus, whatever the case he's talking about over there, because it's not a bracha kavua. In other words, it's a bracha that you make when you forgot in the benching. So he says, no, where do we find something that you have a bracha and it doesn't have a Shem Hashem? Because it's not a davar that's kavua. It's not a bracha kavua. Says the Gemara, says the Torah, just like doimer lebirchas azimun, just like zimun she'afal pi shehu min haTorah, even though zimun is deraisa, but ein by loy shem v'loy malchus, because it's not kavua, because not every time we bench do we do a zimun. So here you have it. The Torah brings a ravid that zimun is deraisa. Now, I must tell you that the Rambam in the Perador, in the 71st Siman, the Heilige Rambam, Hitaka says that the Rabbananu, Vadai, Ukra Smachta Ba'alma. It's a Vada only the Rabbanan, and the Pasuk is only in a Smachta Teraisa. And this is the Shita, as you saw, of the Mishnah Berurah in two places. It's really not just the Mishnah Berurah. The Emes, it's Taka, Kimat, most of the Paiskim, it's the Yavitz in the Morak Tzia in Siman Kuf Tzadi Gimel. It's the Shagas Aryeh in Simin Chav Dalid. It's the Prima Godim in about 6 different places. The Prima Godim says this. It's the Graz in Kuftari Tesiv Tes. It's the Chayodim in Simin Mem Ches. And it's the Kseisa Shulchan, and most of the Achreinim Kimat all go that Zimun is the Rabbanon. The Sharatzian's words are quite convincing. Zimun, the Rosh Poiskim, Hu the Rabbanon. The Aruch HaShulchan, I found the stira. I didn't mitzayin it in the Marmakoimis because myself I wasn't sure. Now maybe I'll be Magala the Said. Yarchei Shulchan and Simin Kuf Tadi Tes and Sif Dalit. He seems to say clearly and quite convincingly. He says, L'chayra, Avagav de B'deraisa loim nekim in katin. We don't take on that a child at the age of 13. We don't take on B'deraisa that a child at the age of 13 is considered an adult. We have what's called chazaka derava, that we have a chazaka that we can assume he's an adult. That chazaka we only use on shailas of the Rabbanan. But if you have a shaila of deraisa, then we don't take on that a child has a din of a gadol. Says Yarchei Shulchan, so how do we give the kid to bench? How do we give a kid to bench? Chayra, we need him to be moitzias. He says, v'tzarich bedika miltzar for lezimun. So he says nothing to worry about. He says, why? Zakter, because since Zimun is only Drabanan, that's his clear mashmoyis over here, you could be Mekel, the Kain, Aminig, Pashit. That once a person is a bar mitzvah, where's it Pashit? At the Sudas bar mitzvah. You give the kid to be the Mezamin. So you see that even though the Pasuk talks about Zimun the Chayr is only in a Smachta. And that's why the minig is to give to the bar mitzvah boys the bench. The emes is that the Stipler in the Orchos Rabbeinu, in the 86th page, based on a Chazain Ish in Simin Lamed Aleph and Sif Aleph, he says, don't give the bar mitzvah boy to bench. Why? Because Zimun's deraisa. Lo nasan lezamen lechasan bar mitzvah, because we're not soymech on the chazaka. It's very interesting. The Chazon Ish says, Raisi in the Mishnah Berurah, he says, Roiv Poiskim hold that Birchas Hazimin is D'Rabbanan, V'lo yadati mihema. Says the Chazon Ish, I don't know who these Roiv Poiskim are that they hold that it's a D'Rabbanan. I disagree, and I think it's D'Oraisa, and don't let the Bar Mitzvah boy bench. Now, I showed you already, Rabbi Isai, it's Taka Roiv Poiskim. It's the Charedim, it's the Oilas Tomid, Kuf Tzadi Tes, it's the Rishon Letzion in Brachis and Davnim Chesem and Beis, it's the Yavitz, like we mentioned, the Shagasai, the Pimagodim, the Graz, the Chayodam, and of course, the Mishnah Berurah. And now you see it's also the Chayer, the Aruch HaShulchan. So therefore, that's clear why the minig is, like the Aruch HaShulchan says, is to give the Bar Mitzvah Bacher the bench. However, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that in Kuf Tzadi Aleph, in Siv Gimel, the Aruch HaShulchan brings down, he says, he says, Nira, he's talking about Payal and workers over there. Nira di mazimin lefneim mevarchen zimin. He's talking about that we know there's certain kulas that we gave the workers, the Payalim. There's certain kulas that the Payalim have when it comes to benching, because the Balabatim were very makbid, Mamela they didn't have time to bench, so therefore we took away the requirement of benching. The whole benching, says the Aruch HaShulchan, that's all on the rest of benching. But when it comes to Zimun, Harei, Nira, Shehu, Min HaTorah, since Zimun is D'Oraisa, so therefore you have to make sure that even the workers bench, it's somewhat of a stira in the Aruch HaShulchan. I'll let the Yidam think about it. Akapanim, the minig, ein achar minig klum, and the minig remains that a bar mitzvah bacher does get the schus. He gets the schus of leading the benching, because past this we take on the halacha that a zimun is a d'Rabbanan. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakol niyeh. Now, as Rabbi say, in the etzim hazimun, so some have a hanhaga that they stand during the Zimun. Where does this come from, to stand during the Zimun? So it's interesting, over here, when you look in the Eshel Avram, the Buchacha, he brings down in the beginning of Kuf Tzadi Beis, in the beginning of Hilchas Zimun, he brings down that you're dealing with a Davar Shebekdusha when you're dealing with 10. And just like we add Elikenu to a Zimun when you're dealing with 10, he says, does anybody in his right mind not stand when it comes to Kedusha? Okay, the Svardim, they have Anhaga that at Kaddish, they take a sit. But the Minig Ashkenazim certainly is that we stand during a Mein Yesh Meirabah. Certainly we stand during Kaddish because it's Davar Shebekdusha, like every Davar Shebekdusha. So he says, no, that which we add Elikenu shows it's Davar Shebekdusha. So he writes, Mikol Makaim, Midas Chasidus Nachan Vadai Lamoid. Sounds like mamish, actually standing mamish. Now the Darkei Chaim, Shalom, that's the Munkatcher, he says at a Zimun of 10, he used to stand a little bit. He might be exas. Now some of us, I don't know, I think in the Altaheim, in the old country, could be ich bin from the andere old country, from wo du bist, aber ich komme from Altaheim, was heißt das Flappisch. I remember that before I went to yeshiva, nobody stood in the Mezumin. I remember when I came back from yeshiva, at that point already, everybody was standing, but they weren't just standing at 10, they were standing at 3 also. Now, what's the shot in the Miniga Oilam that people stand by 3? That I have no Havana, because it's not a Davar Shebekdusha. And that, if you look in the Sefer River of Ephraim, in Chelik Aleph, in Simin Kuf Mem, and Ois Daled, he also doesn't understand where it comes from to stand when you have a Mezumin of 3 people. Even to give a little lift, sometimes you see a person saying, Baruch Shechana Mishalei. That I don't understand. But what about by 10? How come the minig in the Haim, some people didn't stand, and now you see that Achshadoira, and you see people do stand. So it's interesting, in the Chasam Sofer, in Orach Chaim, in Siman and Aleph, he says not to stand. He says, when it comes to Mezumin, even of 10, it seems to be the Iker mitzvah of benching is a mitzvah that's said while sitting. And a Zimun is something that connects itself to the benching. So dafka, the shame of the mitzvah is bidafka to be done while sitting. And I saw that the Brisker Rav is brought down in Ramach Sternbuch, Zayin Gesund, in Chelik Aleph, Siman Kuf Mem Beis, he brings down, from Reb Chaim, B'Shem Reb Chaim, Brisk, that B'Birchas Zimun of Asara Baruch Lekenu Daitoi Ein Lamoid. In Brisk they don't stand, because by Birchas HaMazon, the mitzvah is b'yeshiva. Someone told me over that in Lita, the minig was not to stand. So there you have, if you're Hungarian and you never stood during Elikenu, that's because of some Sofer. If you're from Lita, that seems to be the minig by Brisk, and minig Lita not to stand by Elikenu. to stand by 3, that for sure don't do. If you're a mun catcher, no, some stomach, you should stand, at least not stand, but you give a little epis, lift by Baruch Elokeinu, Shechal Mishalai. That's Rabbi Isai, what you see over here in Kuf Tzadi Beis. And then we go weiter, Kuf Tzadi Gimel. Now, the next shaila that we have to deal with, which is what Kuf Tzadi Gimel primarily is dealing with, is what is considered that we have a togetherness klape aziman. And this is always a big shaila at a chasana in general, especially now during Corona, people that are zoicha that they had around them, family members the whole time. So there's a lot of cases where a person's sitting at the table, 2 people were sitting, one guy comes in, they finish before him, they start before him, they start after him. What makes it that we are mitzuref to a zimun? So this is be'emes, like most things, it's a mechaikas rishonim. Rabbeinu Yena in Brachas Lamed Beis says that it's all totally in the start of the Suda. Because we need to have a kviyas of 3 people coming together. And when those 3 people come together, so then that makes a zimun is chayvus. That is mechayiv us. And Rabbi say, if you're a chayiv in zimun, you can't break the zimun. You already were chal on you. The 3 of you have to make a zimun. So then you can't get up until you somehow bench together, which we'll see how to do that in a moment. But then if it's meichel on you, the chayiv, so then it's mutal on you to make sure that you don't leave beforehand. The person can't say, okay, I had a chiyuv of zimun and it doesn't work out for me, and he just leaves. Then he was mevatel, either a mitzvah deraisa or he's mevatel a mitzvah derabbanan, but he was mevatel a zimun. He was over in an isser. So what makes it that we are considered together enough so that the zimun is chayvus upon us? So Rabbeinu Yeina Shita, he says, kava atzman mitchila lebirchas hamoitzi. If they sit down together, b'dafka, either like I heard from Rav Scheinberg once, that they come to wash the Til Yadayim together, or they actually sit together and have bread together. But at the start of the meal, that's what's kaveya, which means if you started 5 minutes ago, 2 people, in walks somebody 5 minutes later, 2 minutes later, whatever it is, that's not called they were maskul together. Rabbeinu Yonis Shitas, they're not chayiv in azima. Toisvis, in Brachas and Daf Hey, in Dibra Maskul Shleisha, says Pumfakert, he says it's enough, he's masking that in the beginning also connects. But he says it's enough also the end. Because at the end, that's when it's chal the chiyuv of the Birchas Hamazon. So if we end together, and derech agav, end together means I don't have to end the same exact sentence, the same exact second as you. When you end, I end that second. It means that we ended, I finished my meal, you finished your meal 3 minutes later, 4 minutes later, but I stuck around, and theoretically, says the Mishnah Berurah, if you would give me something to eat, theoretically I could still eat it. not something so major, but even a snack. So then that's called we ended together. Says Tais says, Bain if you start together, Bain if you end together, that is enough for a zimun. Which means that, go back to our case, guy comes 5 minutes late, but he ends together, so then you'll be chayiv in the zimun. However, if you didn't start together and you didn't end together, very common case. People, let's say you have a lot of bachrim in the house, you have your children around you, etc. So he comes, this kid comes then, this kid comes then. 2 people started the meal. A few minutes later, the 3rd and 4th come. Then the first 2, they're ready to leave, and they leave. They wouldn't be chayiv in zimun. And that's the psak of Rabbeinu HaGadol, the Mishnah Berurah, and Zimun Kuf Tzadi Gimel, Tziv Kotten Yutes. And that's his psak in the Shar Tzin, Tziv Kotten Tezayin. He says that that's the ikar. If you either started together or finished together, chayiv in zimun. But if you did neither, you didn't start together and you didn't finish together, both of them you didn't do, so then you're not chayiv in zimun. Now, are you allowed to be mezamin in that case? So this I saw in the Sefer Birchas Abayis. As a great Jew from years ago in Shar Yud Ches, he says, "Aval and lo yischila b'yachad, v'gam lo yigomru b'yachad, ein chayiv b'zimun. However, im yirtzu mevarchim b'mizumin. If they want to, they're allowed to." Now he bases this on a complicated Mogen Avram, but that's the halacha. You're allowed to make a zimun. What would you do in that case, Rabbi Isai? So very simple. The person wants to leave. He would tell the chevra around the table, "No, you guys can answer me." No, so they think, what's the big deal to answer another yid, to do a yid a favor? So even though the Gemara says you're not chayiv to, but why not to do a yid a toiva? Meaning, if you have 4 people, they could tell the one person you have to answer. If you have one person wanting to leave, could he tell the? So here, there's no chayvus at all because there was never chal the chiyav. They didn't start together, they didn't end together. But who doesn't want to do a yid a favor and do a zimun? But you might have to. You realize there's a lot of Mesiras Nefesh involved because the Mishnah Berurah in 3 places, very important Mishnah Berurah. The one that I'll refer to is the one in our Siman, in Siman Kuf Tzadi Gimel, in Sivkotin, Yud, Zayin, the Mishnah Berurah, a very, very emphatic Mishnah Berurah. And he says it again in Kuf Pei Gimel, and he says it again in Siman Reish. You see, the Mishnah Berurah firmly believed in what I'm about to say now. The Mishnah Berurah's shita is that Zimun goes, Bein a Zimun of 3, Bein a Zimun of 10, does not go to just the words, Baruch Shechanu Mishalei Tevei Chayinu. I think if you ask most people, they'll tell you where does Zimun end. Baruch Shechanu Mishalei Tevei Chayinu. That's what it sounds like. HaRav, when I bench without a Zimun, I start from Baruch Atah Hashem Hazanas HaKol, Hazanas HaOlam Kulei B'Tuvai. That has nothing to do with the Zimun. The Mishnah Berurah's opinion is that is an absolute mistake. It's based on a Gemara. The Gemara brings down a Machlekes, Tzvishin, Rav Sheshis, and Rav Nachman. And Rav Nachman's shita is that where does the Birchas HaZimun go? Till, like you thought, Rabbi say, Nevarech, right? Baruch Shechanu Mishalei Tevei Chayinu. But Rav Sheshis Paskin's not like that. Rav Sheshis' shita is that the Zimun goes all the way until Hazanas HaKol. Why would the Zimun go all the way to Hazanas HaKol? Because you need a bracha in the Zimun. You need to have a bracha. It's not enough to say Baruch Shechanu Mishalei. It's Baruch Shechanu Mishalei and connected together with the Baruch Shechanu Mishalei, that we come together to say we have eaten together, and then we make the bracha, the first bracha, Azan Es HaOlam Kulei B'Tu B'Chem B'Chesed. We make that whole bracha together. All together. How do you make that bracha together? Says the Mishnah Berurah in explaining the shita of Rav Sheshis. And Rav Sheshis is gepaskined by the Ramah. And not only is Rav Sheshis paskined by the Ramah says V'kein Nahagin. And this is the psak of the Levush, and this is the psak of the Gras. And this is the psak of the Chayodam. And this is the psak of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. And this is the psak of the Ben Ish Chai, even for the Svardim. And this is the psak of the Aruch HaShulchan. And he says, Cain is the minig HaPoshit, Ve'ein L'shanis, and Cain is the psak of the Bag. What's this psak? The psak is that the Mishnah Berurah brings in Kuf Tzadi Gimel Sifid Zayin, that when it comes to benching with Zimun, the first bracha, the Mevarich has to make out loud, and everyone should follow along Mila b'Mila and say the word Mila b'Mila. Abai say in the time of Chazal, the bencher, the Mezamin, he would say the Zimun out loud, and we might say everybody. So that much we don't do. But the Mishnah Berurah says, if you can't hear, sometimes you're at a big simcha, and the Mezamin is over there, and there's 100 people, and he's going to go, and he's going to say, and then he's going to say, you're not going to hear him, you're sitting all the way over there. Most of the people aren't going to hear him. The Mishnah Berurah says, you're not Yarchei the Zimun. And the Mishnah Berurah says, Ad Kedei Kach, he says, split up into groups of 3. You hear this, Maisa? I don't think this is the Minhag HaOlam, Rabbi say. I don't want to disturb the peace, but that's what the Mishnah Berurah says over here. He says, because if you don't do that, you're not being Yarchei Zimun. And he says, and worse, you're making Shem Hashem Levatala. He said, Baruch Elokeinu Shechanu Mishalei Tevei Chayinu, and you stop in the middle. If you don't go and add now, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam, that the Mezamin should say it out loud, and we say with a Mila b'Mila, says the Mishnah Berurah. So says the Mishnah Berurah, if you don't do that, you're not Yarchei Zimun. Now this taka has a lot of nafkaminas. Nafkamina number 1 is taka, like we just said. When you come to bench Zimun, the next time you bench Zimun in your house, you have to hear Mila b'Mila. You have to say Mila b'Mila and hear from the Mevarich. He has to say it hecher, hecher. He has to say it out loud, and you have to say together Mila b'Mila right before the end. You finish Baruch Atah Hashem Hazanas HaKol, and you'll be able to say Amen to his bracha. That's one nafkamina. Another nafkamina is like I just mentioned. If you want to finish your meal early and you want them to answer you, so then you have to say over Baruch Shechanu Mishalei Tevei Chayinu, and then the whole first bracha, they have to hear the entire thing, and then they can go back to eat. That's the second nafkamina. A third nafkamina is a microphone. Because of this, says Rabbeinu Agadol, the Shevet HaLevi. The Shevet HaLevi is in Chelik Yud, in Siman Mem at the end over there. He brings down that don't use a microphone for benching. He says, what's it going to be? You're going to use a microphone for benching. And it's like everything that we know, we don't like using a microphone for Havdalah. If you want to make a shahakal on a microphone and he knows you're making a bracha now and I'm not being moitzi you, there's no problem. But if I'm making a Havdalah on a microphone, so that, or Shamazam and many of our poskim say that's a problem. Because you need to be Yotzei Shemei Koina, not Shemei a microphone. There's a little guy inside the microphone who's repeating over what you're saying, but he's not a Jew. He might be a guy. Who knows who's inside the microphone? He might be a guy. Who knows? So upon him, he can't be moitzi you. Says the Shevet HaLevi, when you're being Yarchei, benching, you need the mezumin to connect us. So I need to hear him say those words. Now, on this, now that we've established that, in other words, now that we've established that the Zimon goes all the way to the whole entire first bracha, so he says, how are you going to go and make the whole first bracha? You need to not only not to do some people know this chumrah, so they don't take the microphone by Rabbi Yisrael Nevarech. Rabbi Yisrael Nevarech is not a problem. Yishem Hashem Nevarech is not a problem. The problem starts when you get the Baruch Shechan Mishaloi and the whole first bracha. So that is the Shita of the Shevet HaLevi, and this is certainly the Lichatchila Dikan Haga, but I can't leave Klal Yisrael without a Limitz Chus. That's what our Rebbeim taught us, Rabbi Isai. The Chazon Ish argues on half of this Mishnah Berurah. Ironically, the Chazon Ish tells us that if you're dealing with a Zimon of 10, then you don't need to hear the first bracha from the Mevarech. Only a Zimon of 3. Why? Says the Chazon Ish, the Chazon Ish says, when I say Baruch Elokeinu Shechanu Mishaloi, that is a bracha, because I said the Shem Hashem. So now we're connected with a Bircha Zimon. So therefore, I don't need to now say Hazanas Olam Kuloi out loud, because the Baruch Elokeinu is a bracha. So we have what's called a Bircha Zimon. But Masha'en Kain says the Chazon Ish, and also the Kseisa Shulchan and Siman Mem Hey Ois Hey said the same thing. Shnei Neviim Nesnabdim Nevu Echos. He says that when you have a Zimon of 3, there you need a bracha. Because you said, Baruch Shechan Mishalai, where's the Shem Hashem? So then you have to connect that Baruch Shechan Mishalai, Baruch Ata Hashem, Hazanas Olam Kuloi. Only by 3, says the Kseisa Shulchan and the Chazon Ish, that you have to hear every word out loud. And you have to hear it together with the Mezamin. I must tell you, even on 3, you need a Limitz Chus, because many people don't do it. Certainly, if you want my opinion, in your own houses, you should be makbid, because this is the psak of the Mishnah Berurah. If you want a Limitz Chus, the Limitz Chus is that the Rabbeinu Chananel, the Rambam, the Rif, the Yeshkol, the Ritva, the Or Zarua, and the Rav Yah all paskin like Reb Nachman. And so does the Shulchan Aruch. Mechaber paskins like that where does Zimon end? Zimon ends at Baruch Shechan Mishalei Tevei Chayinu. I'm aware that the Stama, the Minig Olam is quite stark, like the Shulchan Aruch of a Manasseh by side. The Ramah says King Nehagim, and the Aruch HaShulchan says Ve'ein L'Shanais, and even the Ben Ish Chai says that a Svardi should listen. And I didn't find any of the maybe Chassidische Paiskim that would have some type of a minig. The Kitzer for the Hungarians was Machmir, the Graz was Machmir. So therefore, certainly, L'Chatchila, one should try, at least when possible, to hear the first bracha, certainly by 3, and at least L'Chatchila by 10 also. Now, this brings us to what happens. A Yid, he comes to a chasana, he doesn't want to get stuck there. I mean, a chasana is a wonderful thing, and halavai, we should be zeicha to go back again to have chasana zusammen. But he doesn't want to get stuck there the whole night. He has a chavrusa, he has to be an ehrlich yid. He has to work in the morning. If you're not going to sleep, how are you going to work in the morning? He has to wake up for davening. He has to a chavrusa in the morning, at 5 in the morning, fartog diki yidin. So he doesn't want to get stuck at the chasana the whole night. But what does he do? He came and he washed. And now that he washed together with 3 people at the table, so now he became a chayav. If he washed not at the same time as them, and they started already, so he doesn't start with them, and he finishes early, that's for sure okay. He's not mechuyev in Zimon. He said he's allowed to, but he's not mechuyev. But let's say the case is he started with them. It's a much more common case. He comes to the chasana, and right after the chuppah, he goes inside, they all wash together, they sit down, and they eat together. So he's chayav in Zimon. He's chayav in Zimon of 3, he's chayav in Zimon of 10. So what do? And Derech Agav, it's interesting. There's a Kiryat Sefer. The Kiryat Sefer in Brachas in Perek Hey, he wants to say that 3 is the Rabbanon, but 10 is the Raisa. So here he is. He sat down at a table with 10 people, and he might be chayiv in Zimon deraisa. So what do? But learning Torah is also deraisa, and Shalom Bayis is also deraisa. And your wife told you better not stay at the chazan the whole night. So what do? So there's an Igris Moshe. Now, before I tell you this Igris Moshe, the Buchacha in Eshel Avram and Simin Kuptzadi Gimel, he says, it does not work to say, I don't want to have das to be mitzaref. Who cares if you want to have das? Does it say, could you have das? I don't want to put tefillin on today. I'm having das. I'm not davening mincha today. You can have das like that. There's no such thing as das like that, Rabbi Yisai. Says the Buchacha, same thing with benching. 3 Yidden, 10 Yidden come to sit together to eat bread. You can't have das. There's no such thing. But I'm having das that we're not going to join together. What do you mean you're having das? You can't have das on such a thing. The Chazal or the Rebbeinu Shalem said that when 3 people eat together, they have to bench. So you have das not to. That's the Buchacha. And more recently, I saw that Reb Nissen Karelitz in the Aliba de Hilchos that they bring from Reb Nissen Karelitz, that he says, what does it work to have das? But I must tell you, Rabbi Yisai, Kafi my findings, it seems to be that this is a das yochid. The Makor Chaim, the Chavis Yair, he says explicitly, l'chayra, not like this, l'chayra. He says, you're not allowed to split up a zimun. Says, hainu b'sheskimu levarich pamechas. That's only when they came together with the heskim, but Mashen Kain, if I have das that I don't want to be mitzaref, so he says it's mutter. And the Graz in Kuf Samech Zayin Sif Yud Ches says the same thing. He says it's al das shaloi litzaref. If they have das not to be mitzaref, it could be they're not connected. And this Chita Rabbeinu Agadol, the Igris Meisha in the 56th tshuva of Igris Meisha tells us that if you say beferish that I don't want to be mitzaref, I come to a chasana and I say I'm not being mitzaref. Before you sit down, you say I'm not going to be mitzaref to the zimun. Ramosha says emphatically that at least, not as a lichatchila, but at least as a b'diavad eitzah, it works. In other words, I'll sit down and I'm having das that I'm not going to be mitzaref myself to them. I'm not going to bench with them. Ramosha says it works. What's Ramosha's raya? Says Ramosha, the Mogen Avraham in Siman Tov Kuf Nun Beis is over there talking about a person that accidentally sat together on the Sudas Mafsekes of Tisha B'Av, of Erev Tisha B'Av. And the halach is you're not supposed to make a zimun, and you're not supposed to eat together. So now I accidentally ate together, so now do I have to make a zimun? Says the Mogen Avraham, no. Why not? So the Mogen Avraham, it's not called a kvias, because ein daitam l'kvaya. Says Rav Moshe, it's a kal v'chaimer. Over there, Chazal's das can override my das to sit together. Because we had das to come to sit together. Chazal said you can't sit together, so therefore your das is batal. Says Rav Moshe, when I come in and I have a das that I don't want to be mitzaref, I don't want to come together. And this is why Rav Moshe said, it's a little bit abused Rav Moshe, because he doesn't say it's mutter l'chatchila. He says, kisheyesh tzorich ve'achreach. I think not getting stuck at a chasana all night is yesh tzorich ve'achreach. And certainly, yesha ma lismaich. Shita Vigos Moshe. Orchas Rabbeinu brings down from the Stipler an interesting stuff, from the Chazon Ish, an interesting story. Orchas Rabbeinu brings down in the 220th page in Chelik Gimel. He says, Reb Chaim Kanievsky once told me that he asked the Chazon Ish when he was learning in yeshiva. So he said he would eat at one table with 10 bachrim. And Reb Chaim Kanievsky was always a masmid. So he would finish eating at the table and he wants to go back to learn. Do I have to wait for those 10 to make a zimun of 10? So Moron, the Chazon Ish, Heishiv, that he should have das when he washes in his hands. Shaloi litzaref imasara. You should have das not to be mitzaref to the 10, and have das just to make a zimun with 3. Mistama, 3 guys you'll find that'll want to go back to the base madrash with you. So he said,
Kallus, if I can ask a question, Rav Moshe said the word beferish.
I'm getting to that. I'm getting to that. I'm getting to that. Bez Hashem. So Rav Moshe says, beferish, yoimru beferish. Over here, you see that the Chazon Ish held that you don't have to say beferish. It's enough just to have kavanah. It's enough to have the kavanah. We'll see in a moment if Taka there's a machlekes over here. But Al-Kapanim, the Chazon Ish, he says over here, he says an interesting thing. He told him, go and have das to only join with 3 people and not with the 10. So Shoel Kain Gamzim and Megimel Yachal Avatal. So the Chazon Kanievsky said, as if to say, I'm a very big masmid, and I can't even find 3 guys who are as fast as me. So he asked him, what about 3? What about by 3? Heishiv Moron. So the Chazon Ish said, Zimen Begimel Ein Kedai Levatal. Interesting Chazon Ish. Rav Moshe was makel even by 3. And this shaila does kavana believe work. It's very interesting. I saw in the Sefer Smachis, he brings down in Parak Aleph and Sif Chav Beis that taka kavana does work. The raya kavana works is l'chayra. Rav Moshe comes from the Mogen Avraham. The Magen Avraham is talking about that Chazal came along with their das and they canceled your das of making it siruf of people together. Now, all this is not being spoken out. This is all just machshavet das. So then it could be that you would have a raya from Rav Moshe's raya that if I have das not to be mitzdaref, that the das should be'etzim work. Now, it could be moisif one nekuda. Does it work for a guy like me? I heard this year, I'm saying, forget it. For the rest of my life, I know now that I don't want to get stuck at chasanas, and that's always my das. L'chayra, if your bemis mean it, I don't see why not. And, I guess if you're a busy person, somebody who follows in a good schedule, that they're learning ganz mesech the brachas, medala alochas, and dala das, he's got a busy schedule. It could be there's an umdana about such a person, he doesn't get stuck at chasanas. Not chalila. I don't want to mizalzel in chasanas, but you know what I mean. So upon him, there certainly is a makim to be mekel. Now, la alocha, the gabe, the next shaila, we talked already about zimun deraisa, zimun derabanan. This what connects us. The beginning, the end, how to do the zimun. We need the mila b'mila, every single word together, every single word, at least in the first bracha, listening to him. That's certainly the lechatchila. And now we saw, does das work? It seems to be from the Gaon of Moshe that das does work. The truth is, Rabbi Yisai, when you look at a lot of the poskim that discuss this topic, in other words, it's not just Rav Moshe that's mekel, like I mentioned, the Chazanish, the Das Torah, the Bejan, in Siv Beis, he says, "Im Yoshu mitchila adaita shalei litztarif." Again, you see that lashon adas. Like Rabbi Gadisman is asking, it seems to be that the Das Torah held it's enough das. It's true. If Moshe does say Yomer beferish, and that does trouble me, I must admit. I do have pachad, but I'll upon him in the shiurim of Rav Elyashiv. Then the shiurim of Elyashiv, which I understand are a direct quote from Rav Elyashiv, in the 560th page, it says, "Shleisha shoichlim yachad v'kivnu mitchila shalei tzarif." Does that work? So he says like this. He says, a very important nekuda. Ein moyel kavana loyles chayiv bezimen. He's answering the question we started with. You can't say, I have kavana not to put on tefillin today. Who are you? Shaygitz. You can't have kavana not to learn today. What's the balabas of the Torah? You're in charge of the Torah. Who are you? But if that, you can't say, I'm having das not to be mitzdarif to the zimun. No such thing. I'm also going to have das not to bench. Who are you? But I'm not joining together with the group. Now here, Rebbe Elyashiv in his Metek L'Shoinai seems to be saying even just to think, right? Yechashiv k'moisha lo yachal b'shleisha. And Amnam ein ladavar makor, says Rebbe Elyashiv, albeit that there's no makor to it, but kach noyagim. This is the minig. So upon him, it sounds like there certainly is a mokim to be mekel, and it sounds like he can make this t'nai in his lathe, and it sounds like even there could be an umdana that if you always do this, that you could do this, and this is definitely an eitzah for a busy person to not get stuck in a place where he doesn't want to get stuck. Now, is Rabbi Yisai klape the etzim hitztarfus of the mizumin of the zimun? What is mitzarif us together? So, like I think it's known, three people, three separate tables in a restaurant. That's not mitzarif to zimun. One table has nothing to do with the other table. On the other hand, a chasana is yes mitzarif for zimun, because we're all coming together for the same purpose of the chasana, of the chasan and the Kallah. So that's yes mitzarif for a zimun, and we all are together, Yarchei one zimun. But there are some cases which are a little bit more complicated. For example, a yeshiva. The minig in a lot of yeshivas is that the minig in some yeshivas, they think you're not allowed to make a zimun. If you would ask my opinion, which obviously I'm not right, but I would have thought, why should a yeshiva, which is a makom, which is supposed to be mechanech our children in Torah and mitzvahs, why over there shouldn't they get a chinuch in doing mizumin? So bichlama, if one of the above situations that we spoke about, for example, he came in later than all the other bachrim, and he left earlier than all the other bachrim, he didn't finish with the bachrim, or let's say he had das because he knows he's a masman, he doesn't want to get stuck at a meal in bachrim and whatever. Okay, fine. But in a normal case, a bunch of bachrim are sitting at the table together. Are they chayiv in zimun? So you see already, Rechaim Kanievsky asked the Chazanish. The Chazanish said you could have an eitzah to get out of it because you don't want to get stuck there. And even by 3, he wasn't so happy, you saw from the Chazanish. maybe he was also troubled at a chinuch of getting used to never having Zimon in yeshiva. Yeshiva is a place which is supposed to be mechanech and Torah and mitzvahs. I think it's Yadua that Rav Moshe has a famous tshuva about Chal Yisrael. Rav Moshe says, even though in yeshiva sometimes they're makel, Rabbi Yankiv had a gvissa shita like that, klape echsherim and zachin. But Rav Moshe said, yeshiva is supposed to be mechanech, to be a year shemayim, and to be doing the extra. So certainly we should be mechanech them to do the zimun, and to do the extra, which might even be the chiyuv, and to not pater themselves. So what's this minig that in yeshivas they don't do zimun? What's the pshat? A lot of yeshivas, the bachrim don't do zimun. So the truth is, I looked around, and the Minchas Yitzchak in Chelik Ches and Simin Ches, he says, why not? He says, Ad kedei kach, even if they're sitting at separate tables. He learns it's based on a sugi in Kuf Tzadi. Yeah, Batson, they would sit at the same table. They just can't because they're not in the room. So then it's Masar of them. Okay, my knowledge in yeshiva says it's not exactly the Metzias like that. People sit at the table with the ones they want. But Al Kapanim, certainly if you're sitting at the table with a group of people and you come to sit to them and you started with them or you finished with them, so then you should make a zimun. And Ad kedei kach, I don't know why you should have the das that you don't want to be mitzaref with them. Just finish, do at your own pace, come in and tell them, could you just answer? Most of the time, people are willing to answer. And this psak, Abaisai, I see the Beis Baruch, Rabbi Yamin Zilber, also in Das Nidbru and Chelik Zayin and Simin Nun Vav says, and they asked Rav Chaim Kanievsky in the Sefer Doyle Mashke, Cheder Eichel B'Yeshivas, Eichel B'Shulchan and Nefradis. They asked him on separate tables, are they mitzaref? He says yes. Now that's a chiddush. Separate tables being mitzaref, that's already a chiddush. And I saw that the Or L'Tzion, he says something interesting. He wants to be mechalik between Shabbos and weekday, and this you just heard also from the Zeis HaBracha in the 133rd page, that by Shabbos, when all the tables are really singing together, there's a matzav together, etc. No, so that's for sure that they're all mitzaref together for the Zimun, which means, Rabbi Isai, you can't leave without doing a Zimun. Very important. But on the weekday, he says each table, each makom is separate, and their taka, each table should make the Zimun by themselves. I do not see why yeshiva bachrim and yeshiva. I don't see why they shouldn't make it. I'll read you what Rav Chaim Pinchas Scheinberg in the Zeis HaBracha on the 133rd page. If they had kavanah not to be mitzaref, seder. They sit at separate tables and they have no shayches, seder. Right? Because Moirim the Paiskim that two separate tables are not mitzaref, seder. But that's all on a separate table. But you have your three friends. Avadi should make a zimun. I don't see any reason why not. People say svaras, which are interesting svaras. I don't know. It has to be a big mechadish. They say svaras that yeshiva, it's like there's no kfiyas because it's all just Torah. I don't know. Everybody say Torah is nitin amanas l'kayim. So they have to eat like a yid and they have to get a limit how to eat like a yid. And this is fakert. If anything, the Beis Medrash l'chud and the Cheder Eichel l'chud. And in the Cheder Eichel, you teach a child the halachas of Zimun. Maybe not to be mitzaref two tables, I hear, but certainly one table, and certainly that should be makbid to make a Zimun. It's a mitzvah yakar, and it's possibly a deraisa according to many shittas. That's l'chayra what should be klape a tzirif of Zimun in a yeshiva. L'chayra. Now, l'maisa, excuse me, l'maisa, just to end off over here with some more interesting ideas in Zimun. We know that sometimes a person could be eating meat. We just had this on Shavuos. Could have it all the time. Somebody's eating meat and somebody else is eating milk. And now they want to know, the three of them are together. Could they make a Zimun? So over here, there's a very interesting Mishnah Brura in Simin Kuf Tzadi Vav as we trudge along weiter. Mishnah Brura over here says an interesting chiddush. He says that if I have two people and one of them can yes eat from the other, but the other one can't eat from him, so then they are mitzaref to Zimun. In other words, the meat eater, he can't eat from the cheese eater because he has to wait 6 hours and he has to bench. But the cheese eater is allowed to eat from the meat eater. What would he do? He would just wash out his mouth, he just wash his hands, and he just takes off the bread, brings new bread to the table. So therefore, cheese eater, can eat from you. So therefore, we're mitzaref to Zimun. Says the Mishnah Brura, since we're mitzaref to Zimun, it's because of who? Me, the cheese eater. So give that guy the bench. Unless the other guy's a kohen, which is a mitzvah deraisa, v'kidashtai. Now, what is a practical case of this? So first of all, if I'm eating hard cheese, whatever is called your hard cheese, let's say Parmesan or whatever, you have a hard cheese. I think Rav Aaron Zechariah the Baruch used to say hard cheese means like the Gemara says, mit axe. You have to take a kardaim, hack the cheese. So it means very hard cheese. But I'll upon him, I'm eating hard cheese. You're eating meat. No Zimon. Because I can't eat from you without benching. You can't eat from me without benching. So no Zimon. Some cases, of interesting cases over here that you could down on is what happens if you have, let's say, two people that I won't eat your matzah and you don't eat my matzah. Could have like an interesting, sometimes the shver, he's v'dafka makbid on eating machine matzah. And sometimes the Eidim, he's v'dafka makbid on hand matzah. So here, l'chayra, they can't be mitzaref. They can't be mitzaref because I won't eat from you, you won't eat from me. And I saw talking Rav Moshe Sternbach and Chelik Dalet and Simen Kuf, he brings this. He says, I came near l'maisa, the kol echad makbid lechol matzah shaloi dafka, and medama shematzais of my matzahs are mahoda b'yoyser, and I won't eat b'shum oif in your matzahs. He says, maybe there's no tzira for Zimon. The nechad oichol matzahs mechayna. He says, one guy eats machine and one guy eats this. He says, so bishlema, if the fellow eats both, so then it's great. He eats machine in hand, you eat only hand, so then you can be mitzaref. And you make the person who eats both, you make him the mezamin. Like we just said, you mechabed the one who caused the zimun, the one who eats both. Now, you probably have this. Somebody once asked me a shaila. He asked me after learning this halach, he said, what happens if you have people that don't mish? So I told him, if you have people that don't mish, then they're never going to eat together on Pesach. So don't worry. Then the only way is going to be that he's in his house. He's in his house. I'm eating my matzah on my behind my camera over here on Zoom. You're eating your matzah on your camera over there behind your Zoom over there. And Zoom is not mitzaref l'zimun, Rabbi Isai. Because even if two batim and everybody knows all the raid today, as you all learned in Hilchas Tefillah and all these inyanim and Siman Kuf Tariyeh, these sugyas, but you know that's only two batim, and maybe if there's a shvil between, maybe, but if we see each other, but no way if we're not really seeing and you're only seeing a computer picture of me. So then, Laida, we're still not together yet, Rabbi Isai. And Be'ez Hashem, we'll be together in Yerushalayim, Yarchei soon. In Siman Kuf Tariyeh Zayin, very important halacha. It's not so known, but when you have three people, when you have two people, the Mishnah Berurah brings down, it's really a Shulchan Aruch and Kuf Tzadi Gimel, there's a mitzvah to try to get a zimun. Here we are talking about yeshiva bakum that aren't making a zimun and trying to get out of zimun. When you have two people, Mishnah Berurah says you should go out of your way to try to give somebody else something so that you can make a zimun. Because there's a mitzvah yikaret to have a zimun. If you have 6 people, you should go out of your way to give 4 people food in order that you can make a zimun of 10. What type of food do you have to give them? So the Magen Avram says even water. Even water. Mishnah Berurah says it's better not to do water, but anything else. If you have 2 people and you give him a cup of Coke, you give him a cup of beer, you give him a cup of tea. Certainly if you give him an apple, you give him a cookie, he's mitzaref to zimun. And the Mishnah Berurah brings, he says in Sivkot and Chav Beis, if the third guy doesn't want to eat bread, it's no problem. You want a third guy to bench with you, you give him a drink. Just don't give him water. The water is not lechatchila, but you can give him a drink. I think the Spanish poskim, they're a bit more machmir, and they say you got to give him something like a pasta babakisnin, a pesasei, ayin in the chikrei leiv in Archaim in Simen Mem Zayin, ayin in the Chaim Shoyel, in Chelik Aleph and Simen Tes, ayin in the Kafachayim and Sivkot and Chav Aleph, that he brings these great poskim. But the halacha l'maisa, at least for Ashkenazim, is certainly that if you have 2 people, it's a very simple thing. Rabbi Isai, you have 2 people, and another guy, you tell him, no, you want to go for a mizum, he thinks Gevald, mizum, and oivei, the worst thing in the world, I have to wash, I have to bench, Gevald, I get a mitzvah d'oraisa. You tell him, don't worry, nothing to worry about. All you have to do is take a drink, not water, and you're mitzaref for a zimun. That's l'chayra, the halacha l'maisa, and l'chayra, that's what you have to do. That's what you should do. Ad kedei kach, does that guy have to sit? Sometimes you can get that guy, you can be masking, he'll take a bite of an apple. I'll eat an apple. Right. That much he's willing to do. But, he says that much and not more. So does he have to sit? So the Chazon Ish says, he says, B'achias Beis v'nigra shaper akar ashnayim shekavu. The Chazon Ish in Siman Lamed in Seif Yud, he seems to say that guy doesn't even have to sit. And the Chazon Ish goes weiter. The Chazon Ish seems to say that guy doesn't even have to hear till Hazan es HaKoil. Now that's a very big chiddush, and the Baal HaTanya is chaylik on both of those chidushim. So you tell that guy, listen, it doesn't hurt. Just take a drink of Coke, sit down for a minute, listen till the end of Hazan es HaKoil. And that certainly is the best thing. The Mishabura says he needs to have a kizayis yarek, taimai, because you have to say the word achalnu. You can't say achalnu, ein achila, pachas, mikizayis. That's simin kuf sadi zayin. In Kuf Sadi Chesra Baisai, I'd be remiss that if you come into a Zimun and you're not Zaycha to eat with them, so then what do you answer? What do you say? So when they say the word, when he says Bershus Maranan Rabbanan Rabbaisai Nevarach Shechan Mishalai, you say Baruch Voidach Shmoi Tomid La'olam Void. And then when they say Baruch Shechan Mishalai, you say Amen. That's Siman Kuf Sadi Ches. Now Siman Kuf Sadi Tesra Baisai, I'm going to end with this, and I'm worried. I don't want to disturb the peace. So, if your wives are in the background listening, so then it could be you're going to have to ask them to leave, which obviously is going to make it that now they're going to be listening with zwei Oidenlach, versteht? With the Geis Oidenlach. So, but what can I do? I don't want to disturb the peace. But there is a sugi over here and a truva from the Goyin Rav Moshe, and it's a shocking thing. But what should I tell you, Rabbi Isai? The Shulchan Aruch over here discusses women and the mezumin. Right away, women and mezumin, it sounds like Baltoisif or something, or it sounds like some feminist, some feminist weirdness again, So I must tell you that in the Shulchan Aruch, it's mafurish and Siv Zayin, Noshim are mezamnis le'atzman. Ladies can make a zumin on their own. I'm not suggesting this, but ladies are allowed to. They're not mechuyev to, but they're allowed to. The Vilna Goyin's Shita ad kedei kach in Siv Zayin, Divrei HaRosh Iker, he paskins like the Rosh. It's a big machlekes rishonim. And when women are together by themselves, the Goyin holds that 3 women by themselves are chayiv. Someone told me before the feminists, Lida, we should go back to such a time. But someone told me that in Gateshead, they used to taka, 3 women used to do a zimun. 3 girls would do a zimun until the advent of people that were doing it, obviously for wrong reasons. So then they stopped it in the seminary over there. And the Goyin held that Amar Rabbeinu, he said, the Goyin said, I'm not going to disturb the peace and tell 3 women to do a zimun because it's not the common thing. But he said it's better that 3 women shouldn't sit together because they're going to wind up, not the gossip the Goyin was worried about. They're going to wind up having maybe a chiyav zimun. So the Goyin said 3 women shouldn't sit together. Now, this is not the psak of Kemat all the Paiskim, the Shulchan Aruch, the Levush, the Graz, the Chayodam, the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the Aruch HaShulchan, all hold that it's not chayiv, it's only reshus, and the minig oilim is that the ladies don't make a mezumin when they're by themselves. Okay, so where am I disturbing the peace? So Rabbi say, when women eat together with men, so it's true when they eat by themselves, they're not chayiv. But when women eat together with men, it is absolutely mefurish in Shulchan Aruch and all of the Paiskim. Aval kisheoichleis im ha'anoshim. When women eat with men, so then chayavis v'yoytzis b'zimin shalanu. Then they are chayiv in our zimin. Which means if a regular Friday night meal, 3 boys are sitting around the table. There's the mami bear, there's the bas mitzvah bear, and they're all sitting around the table together. The 2 girls are chayiv 100%. If you hold zimun as deraisa, if they hold berchas hamazon, maybe women aren't chayiv deraisa. Okay, but they are chayiv 100% in the zimun, and they can't leave without it. And this is why you have a few shilas. One shilas, what about at a chasana? The ladies at the chasana, are they listening to the zimun b'chlal? Maybe you could say a svara. That maybe you could say that it's a standas that they're not being mitzaref together with the men, and there's the other side of the mechitza. Maybe. But Rabbi say, Shimu v'schin nafshechem. If your wife is in the background listening, Rabbi say, you better send her out because you're about to get in a lot of trouble. Because now I know what you're going to do. You're going to go to your wife right after this year, and you're going to say to your wife, you're going to say, what's going on over here? How come when it comes to the zimun, you never come? What's going on over here? Don't you know it's mefurish in Shulchan Aruch that a lady's chayiv in zimun? she's going to say, I didn't know. So listen to this. The Igros Moishin Orichaim in Chelik Hey in Siman Tes Ois Yud. B'davar Nashim Sha'achlu B'Shulchanim Gimel Nashim. When women ate together with 3 men, he says the Chayiv in Zimun. The first in Shulchan Aruch, nothing to discuss. He says, no, is there a limit chos? Listen to the words of Rav Moshe. He says, a limit chos? He says, look, during the week, so maybe she's not shaykh to the meal, b'chlal, because she's serving and she's busy cooking and she's busy putting the kids to bed and she's busy, putting that one back to bed and whatever. So she says, no. And she's busy and she's serving and she's not kavua and she's not a part of it. I guess this is all Rav Moshe Shita also, that she doesn't have das to be mitzdaref because she's busy. She's not really there. He says, so therefore, what happened? Mizden nimshach, that even sometimes during the week when she does sit down with 3 men and she is kavua there, but the ladies got used to not making a zimun in cases where they didn't have das to be mitzdaref. And aside, they stopped making zimuns all over. They thought ladies don't make zimun. He says, Aval al habal vaday mutal. He says, the husband, it's your responsibility to tell her. And don't start benching without. Elamai, you just say, Rabbi Sayin of Arech, and they in the background have to answer, even if they're not at the table, but they have to answer. And he says, he says, what do you want? There's no limit chus on the nashim. Why? Because it's not their fault. It's your fault. What do you want from them? And he says, on Shabbos, there's for sure no excuse. What do you want from them? They would love to be a part of the zimun, but the men don't wait for them. Shabbos, they don't want to wait, and they don't call the ladies. The Gaon Rav Moshe says that a lady is chayiv in zimun when she's with 3 men, and that Rabbi say it's a mitzvah yikara, and it doesn't. I don't think it's going to disturb the peace and cause any feminist uprisings either. And she's chayiv in zimun. I gave you a little bit of an eitzah. If you scream out there, Rabbi Sayin of Arech, and she answers from there, so that way back in Siman Kuf Tzadi Daled, it's mashma that there's what to be seimichan. Akaponim Rabbi Say, this is the inyan of zimun, the inyan of being meichan ourselves for a dvar mitzvah, learning the Heilige Torah, that and the halacha shel zimun, that is the greatest achana for this mitzvah yikara. And halavai that the Rebbeinu Shalom, he should be mizamin us, masmin us to do mitzvahs together. Baguda echas, the zimun Rabbi say, that is mamish the sugi of the aguda. What's the aguda? To bring us together to be mishabeach HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the whole tachlis, Rabbi Say, of why the Rebbeinu Shalom created the world, says the Ramban, is that we should come together in Abati Knesias, in Aguda Echas, to be mishabeach HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So if I had to choose, what's the sugya of the aguda? The sugya of the aguda is zimun. To come together by Aguda Echas and to praise HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's the whole tachlis of the aguda. I get benched, I get in Shabbos from Yerushalayim, Mir HaKodesh.